Welcome to Independent Thought and Freedom, Episode 19. The struggle of African peoples for freedom and development has been an issue on the global agenda for decades, if not more. It has been in the center of world history during the transatlantic slave trade and the struggle for abolition, the scramble for Africa in the 19th century, the decolonisation movement and the civil rights movements in the 20th century, and today, in the migration crisis to Europe and debates over the role of China in the global community and the new so-called scramble for Africa. Through all of this, amazing world historic iconic figures have emerged. Toussaint L'Ouverture, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Dubois, Booker T. Washington, Paul Robeson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Kwame Nkrumah. In the United States and Europe, Kwame Nkrumah's name might not be as recognizable as the other names I just mentioned. But in 2000, Nkrumah was voted African Man of the Millennium by listeners to the BBC World Service, being described by the BBC as a hero of independence and an international symbol of freedom as the leader of the first Black African country to shake off the chains of colonial rule. Who was Kwame Nkrumah and why was he so important? What is his legacy? Is he still relevant today, or is this just a matter of historical education? Today, I am pleased to have as my guest on the podcast the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah, Samia Nkrumah, a powerful woman in her own right who has been making waves trying to keep her father's legacy and dreams alive. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. I'd like to just read off a little introduction for you personally, for our listeners. Samia Nkrumah is the only daughter of Ghana's independence leader and Pan-African activist, Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. I may have got the pronunciation wrong, but I tried. And his Egyptian wife, Fatia Halim Risk. This unique circumstance of Pan-African birth and cultural inclinations underpins her belief in African unity, a belief and a political conviction that relies as much on the writings of her father as it does on her own studies and interaction and political observations and activities. Born in 1960, which is the year that Ghana declared its status as a republic, she and her siblings left Ghana in 1966 after the illegal overthrow of Nkrumah's government. The family lived in Egypt for about a decade before returning to Ghana again in the mid-1970s and then leaving again in the 1980s. She's married and has a son, Kwame. Returning to Ghana permanently in 2008, after many years of living abroad, Samia signaled her intention to rekindle Kwame Nkrumah's vision. She became an MP, and a few years later, the only woman leader of a political party in Ghana. Samia is founder of the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center, an organization set up to promote Nkrumah's vision, philosophy, and political thought. As she articulates it, we must unite politically and integrate our economies for the benefit of African people worldwide. Samia, it is truly a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you.
I look forward to exploring these issues, but I want to start off by asking you, besides your father, obviously he's going to be there, but who has been the biggest influence on you with regard to developing your spirit of independent thought and freedom? Who has been your biggest influence beside your father?
You mean I shouldn't mention my father? In addition,
you can, but that's the easy answer.
It's an easy answer, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be doing all this if I hadn't read his writings, his speeches, his letters. So I cannot lie to you. He's been my biggest inspiration.
So when did you start?
But of course,
Sorry?
Okay, we've always had his books around, and I would read bits and pieces of some of his books or speeches. But I think about 15 years ago, I started rereading some of the books. And I remember the book Africa Must Unite had a powerful impact on me. And it's really the book that made me decide to return home to Ghana and to active politics, because I thought, well, what I'm reading must be demonstrated. It must be lived. I cannot just be talking about these things in conferences and, symposia.
Yeah.
This is something that must be lived.
That's very, very interesting, because, I've interviewed the daughter of Eric Williams, Dr. Eric Williams, who was our first prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago.
Absolutely.
And also the son of Patrick Manning, who was also a prime minister. And it's interesting, a lot of times in the children's lives of these leaders, just like with any child and parent, there might be conflicts, and you have all the family drama that exists for everybody in the world also exists. And there's a distance, there's a rebellion, but then sometimes there's a rediscovery. So it sounds like you had this kind of process 15 years ago where you went to reread. What made you pick up the book again? Was it anything in particular?
I was living outside home, outside Ghana, actually outside Africa. And I became involved in African immigration or diaspora activities.
Where is that? Is that in Europe or in America?
Yes, in Europe. I was in Rome at the time. I was living in Rome. So I actually joined a movement called, the Africa movement. Right. Yes. So, and we were just talking about meeting, discussing issues of relevance to African immigrants and so forth. But somehow through this kind of work, I realized that, well, I need some guidance here. I need some inspiration and guidance. Right. And I had the books, some of them at least, and I thought, let me look here, Yeah. And that gave me the courage to change my life and return home.
Excellent.
To my base now. I call Ghana my base. I mean, I'm up and down different places, but that's my base.
That's right. You are engaging the world. Going back to Ghana doesn't mean that you're retreating from the world, but you are engaging the world from your base.
Absolutely. No, we cannot retreat, and we cannot be on our own in isolation, and we cannot work in isolation. Definitely. So I'm happy with my, let's say, international experience, if you will.
Exactly. That's interesting. Now, and it's amazing to know that you got involved through the African migration issue in Europe, which is a huge thing. Now, I'm sure the organization, well, I would guess the organization that you joined would have been very excited to know that the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah is part of the organization. They probably would have put you up ahead and, to speak for them. You'd have been a great asset and resource for them. Is that right?
Yes, but we also had plenty of challenges. We were Africans from different parts of the continent. We spoke different languages. Yes, we spoke Italian, but we were at different levels of proficiency. So but indeed, yes, they made me the president of the movement. So they had some faith in me. But things were not easy, definitely. And things are not easy for many Africans who are outside. And many make that decision rather out of really, it's almost like a last resort.
Yeah.
The last resort. And it is something we really don't want to see. I mean, about 9,000 people in the last 8 years or so, about 9,000 Africans died crossing.
Yeah,
or getting lost, or God knows, But it's very sad. So it's a big figure. That's
Absolutely.
quite tragic. but we don't hear about it much. We don't have all the details. We don't talk about it much, but it shows that there is a problem,
Yes.
and we must find alternatives so that our people do not leave in desperation in search of a living.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what I wanted to raise, because this is such an important global issue. And, there's a simplistic answer that I think a lot of Western liberals have, which is about, open borders and just letting people in. But I think it's a very complex issue. In terms of, the effect that, this massive migration has on the receiving countries. And I don't think we should be blind to that at all. And then also the fact that, there's chaos and disorder in Africa that is happening, that is pushing this, which needs to be addressed. And then also the role of human traffickers. I think that people don't just come in their thousands on boats. People don't have their own boats to go across. And these things are highly organized. People pay a lot of money. Poor, desperate people are asked to pay lots of money to unscrupulous people who are, because if you are involved in human trafficking, you are very likely to be involved in arms trafficking and also drugs trafficking.
Absolutely.
Prostitution, all sorts of things. So you're putting all these people who consider themselves humanitarians and encouraging this type of movement, they're actually increasing human misery. And so I find it very, I know in Italy, there's this debate about, developing that the solution to the migration crisis has to be the development of Africa itself. So I find it interesting that you seem to have come to that conclusion. And I, as someone myself who spent many, many years abroad, who grew up abroad, and could have lived and did live for a while in other countries, but I decided to come back to the Caribbean. I think I really understand your thinking in this, that is, and you're not retreating. You are engaging the world from your perspective. Am I understanding you right?
No, absolutely. I think, of course, the decision to come back home, it's never an easy one if you've been away, and definitely there will be challenges, and definitely there will be a period of, trying to readapt and all that. So it is not an easy decision, and it takes courage. But honestly, every African, wherever they are, has a purpose, because we are in a particular moment in our history where we've been through the last few centuries have not been easy for us at all. Before that, things were not so bad. But those last few centuries need a project, a serious project for us to get back on our feet and take our rightful place in the world. And I think every African, young or old, must have a measure of understanding of that. Once we understand that we have a purpose now, this generation, yours, mine, the younger one, those before us, but those of us living on this earth as Africans, we have a mission to accomplish. This needs to be understood. It almost needs to be taught to us, you see, because on several fronts, we are lagging behind. And only we can change that. No one is going to do it for us, because we have our hands, as they say here in Egypt, in the fire, So we have to take the initiative. We have to find the courage. We have to find the purpose. We have to find the strategy. So the onus is on us to do something about it. So you're right. These and immigration, the outflow, let's say, of especially young Africans outside the continent, and even within the continent, there's a lot of movement within, but young people just moving to find a way to live and make ends meet. I mean, this is something that must make us think deeply, What is it that we can do in our individual small countries that can make things better? Because we are small countries. We are small economies. But once we understand from our history that this smallness is not our choice, we have not chosen to be small. This was something imposed on us as Africans.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if we understand that, then it is also our choice to change our destiny. It's our choice to think bigger and become bigger. And that is why I have great admiration, or I'm hugely inspired by Pan-Africanists over time, over decades and centuries. People like you said, like Marcus Garvey, people like Dubois, people like George Padmore, your very own. I mean,
yes, right. Mm-hmm.
George Padmore, yes, who became Kwame Nkrumah's advisor on African affairs. Did you know that Kwame Nkrumah dedicated his book, Africa Must Unite? And it's written, dedicated to George Padmore and the African nation that must be. Did you know that?
Yes.
And that's almost his most important book.
Yeah.
And George Padmore, who was not born in Ghana, became an advisor on African affairs. That means, in Kwame Nkrumah's eyes, a man from Trinidad was no less an African, no less a Ghanaian than a Ghanaian born in Ghana. That is the Pan-African spirit that inspires us.
Now, I am of Indian descent, right? And but I have been so inspired by the whole Pan-African movement. I mean, my political consciousness has been absolutely, formed by the experience, and I mean, there's a kind of conflict sometimes when people do this, because then they try to pretend they're African or be African, or these kind of these issues, and then I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to pretend I'm African and I'm part of the Black struggle in that way, but certainly as part of the anti-colonial struggle. Yes, and the Third World movement, and the whole struggle for human freedom and independence, which transcends race and includes everybody.
Absolutely.
And the African story is such an important part of that global historical study. And they're just inspiring people that have been produced by it, that that give us all strength and models. And in the contemporary world, I think this issue that we've kind of hit on from the beginning, and it wasn't my intention, but I want to stay on it since you touched on it, immigration. Because so many people from our countries, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in India, elsewhere, they want to run away. They want to run away from their countries, and they think that going to the United States or Canada or England or Italy or wherever is going to be the solution to their problems. And it is not going to be the solution. And I believe, as you suggested, as you hinted, it's a disorienting process. And it robs you of your mission in so many ways. I think you become unmoored from your real role and purpose in history, and you do have to come home and understand and own it. Listen, yes, there are problems here, but these are our problems that we have to solve. And by owning these problems and solving it, that's how we achieve mission, greatness, purpose, and our true role in the world. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But then Yes, so what are we talking about? Because it is not so easy to change our circumstances or improve them.
That's right.
And yes, so what are we really talking about? So we've gained, most of our countries gained independence, say in late 50s, 60s, and that was our national liberation. But what was meant by that, or what was the purpose of that? Was that an end in itself? Was political independence an end in itself? Definitely not.
Very good
It was
question.
just the beginning. It was just the beginning, you know? Now we must think of the second independence, if you will, for want of a better expression. Political independence was gained so that we can gain control over decision making.
That's right.
How are we going to run our economies to benefit our Africans or indigenous people, owners of the land? How are we going to run our economies to benefit the majority? Now, how are we going to regain control over our resources, over even our culture? How are we going to start, living our culture to make so that it's, it makes it easier for you when you can fully express your culture.
Exactly.
Rather than try and imitate a culture imposed on you.
Right.
So how are we going to do all that? We first needed to have national liberation. But those pioneers of independence understood clearly that that is just the first step. And it's a means to gaining what? Total liberation.
Right.
That is economic independence, cultural emancipation, and so forth.
That's right.
So we are yet, when I said we all have a mission to accomplish, we are yet to gain our second independence, if you like.
Right.
That's where we are now. That's where we are stuck. That's why we can't see the benefits of independence, of national liberation. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, it was better under colonialism, or we would have been better had we.
That's correct.
But yes, but of course, they forget that that was an inhumane system, and the legacy of that system is, to some extent, we don't want to go over all that and play the blame game, but the legacy of that has affected us in some ways, the dependency syndrome, the lack of industries, because you build industries over time.
That's right.
And also what Kwame Nkrumah famously called the balkanization into small, economically unviable states, like the Balkan, the division, let's say, dividing our states into small and viable. So now, if we are going to gain economic independence, if we are going to be in a situation where we can deliver the basic needs of our people, then we have to find a strategy born from our specific circumstances and conditions to gain that second independence. That strategy, the same pioneers of independence put forward in the 60s. They said unity. We are too small to achieve these big dreams and objectives on our own separately. We need to join forces, have common political direction. And I'm using the word political deliberately, because that unity is not simply satisfying, a sentimental aspiration that, oh, we are all alike, we have something in common. Yeah, all that is true. But this is a political solution, just like gaining independence. Kwame Nkrumah famously said, seek ye first the political kingdom. Because once you have the political power, then you can decide for yourself. You decide on the laws, you decide on the policies. So you need that power. So unity, the unity we are talking about is a political project. That's how it must be approached. So it's a deliberate project, a deliberate proposal, a deliberate political project we are talking about. We need to unite our small states politically and economically so that we will be in that strong position to make those changes that will enable us to offer a better standard of living to our people, to industrialize, because we need to become a bit self-reliant. Our food, we import a lot of our food, despite having good weather, fertile ground, because it's hard work. I mean, you need a lot of capital. You need a lot of industries. You need a lot of irrigation projects. To change our conditions, you need heavy work. You see, it's a very, very big, huge task that can only happen successfully if we pool our resources together. And when I say resources, we are talking about material and human resources.
Right.
So that's what I want to invite all of us to think about. African unity will not happen by itself. It has to enter the political debates, and it has to be championed by politicians, by decision makers, because that is where the unity will happen. Yes, it will happen at the grassroots. It will happen amongst the peoples, but it has to also happen on the political front.
I think that's very important. And so let's build up towards that conclusion, because I think a lot of people, coming from, the mainstream perspectives that you'd see on the media, that you'd learn in school, this sounds maybe, I don't know, unrealistic, not in tune with the way, development is supposed to be. So let's kind of work our way up to there for our other listeners. So let's start off. I mean, your father led Ghana to independence in 1957, but I mean, he was far more than an ordinary politician. I mean, that's why he won the BBC poll as the African Man of the Millennium. When I mentioned all these figures like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and Toussaint L'Ouverture and Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah beat them all. And yet,
indeed,
the America.
And he was, sorry to interrupt you. Yes, you're right. And he had passed on in 72. I mean,
that's right.
So decades before that survey was taken. And it was an international one. So people from different parts of the world voted.
Exactly, because he was well known all over the world. He won the Lenin Peace Prize from the Soviet Union at the time. In China, he was well known, and many countries of the world as part of the non-aligned movement and whatnot. But so, what would you say? I mean, this is an important achievement in that sense, to recognition. Let me say in that sense. What would you say made your father so important? Why? What was it?
Okay, he was a Pan-African leader. You see, he was indeed. I mean, when he came to join the independence struggle, because as he always said, it started before him, and it would continue after him. But so when he came to join, he came with that perspective. A huge, wide perspective, with all Africans, wherever they might be, in his mind. He'd studied he was in the States for 10 years, and he met a lot of the intellectuals, students, workers, Africans, so he knew exactly about the discrimination at that time. He lived there. Mm-hmm. He lived with them, worked with them. He understood perfectly what the Black person was going through worldwide, you see, not just in the continent.
Yeah. And then he met CLR James there, who was
that's right.
my
CLR
heroes.
James,
yeah,
absolutely.
And CLR James introduced him to George Padmore in London when he was going to London.
Absolutely, yeah. And then when he was in London, then he worked with Padmore on the Pan-African Congresses. So in 1945, the 5th Pan-African Congress was, he and Padmore worked together to make it happen. You know, they were the chief organizers. And if
I just may also add there, I believe it was the first Pan-Africanist conference in the world was organized by Henry Sylvester Williams, another Trinidadian. Right? So,
absolutely.
And CLR James made this point that for West Indians, African independence was extremely important in their own development. So, so you have these figures like Marcus Garvey from Jamaica, CLR James from Trinidad and Tobago, George Padmore from Trinidad and Tobago, later on Stokely Carmichael, again from Trinidad. But, then you have your figures like Bob Marley, of course, from Jamaica. And you have Blyden, Edward Wilmot Blyden from the U.S.
Absolutely.
You have all these people that have been working for African independence and thinking of African questions. And at the time, because we were colonial, spoke English, we had an access to the English-speaking world that maybe many native Africans did not. And so the West Indians became a kind of vanguard for, and to a certain extent Americans, but West Indians seemed to have a particularly important role, especially in the early days. This kind of vanguard for this global movement, and Nkrumah, coming from Africa, would have lapped all that up and then fulfilled it in a lot of ways.
Yes, but what are we saying? That all these minds, all these aspirations were part of Ghana's independence.
Correct.
So it wasn't surprising when Kwame Nkrumah, on the eve of independence, rather, he says the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation.
Absolutely.
Of the continent.
And I want... you go, continue.
So, no, I was going to say that he defined, Pan-Africanism has different definitions to different people, different activists. But one of his definitions of it was that, it is the total liberation and unification of Africa. And for Africa is the continent, but it's Africans everywhere too. That's his that has always been his understanding of Africa.
Yeah.
But so the total Pan-Africanism to him was a total liberation and unification of Africa. So Ghana's independence ushered in the independence of Africans everywhere.
Yeah.
And on the continent, Ghana became, not just a beacon, but, a lot of liberation movements came to, they had training camps, especially from Southern Africa, Eastern Africa. And in 1960, 17 countries gained independence. 93 years after Ghana. Was that a coincidence? I think not. So Ghana's and then Ghana started relations. Forgive me. My flu. Okay. My flu is coming up. But I was saying Ghana started forging links with all developing countries.
Yes.
India, China,
yes.
Latin America. Excuse me.
Would you like a drink of water?
Maybe I should get one.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
You can speak for a minute.
Right. Well, I was going to say that, yes, that Ghana's independence really was, the Harold Macmillan, I believe, was the prime minister at the time, and they talked about the winds of change in not only Africa, but throughout the whole colonial world. And that with Ghana, although India was the first major colony. I mean, of course, there's America in 1776, and then India in 1947. But after Ghana, became independent, it was just the decolonization process. It was like a domino effect very quickly. As you said, throughout Africa, independence happened, and in the Caribbean as well, because we got our independence in 1962. And the West Indies Federation came first in 58. So it was a consequence of what Nkrumah started in Africa. So he always had an international vision that Ghana's independence wasn't only for Ghana. It was a worldwide movement, and it did start this worldwide movement, and he continued to make these worldwide links.
Even the non-aligned movement, non-aligned movement, I mean, it became stronger during that period, you see? So all this was connected to the independence of our countries. So it was ushering in, that independence was meant to usher in a new era. You know?
Let's talk a bit about Pan-Africanism, because it was so important to Nkrumah, to Ghanaian independence, and your own ideas. Now, I mean, Garvey was not the first Pan-Africanist, but I mean, some listeners may not even know who Garvey was, but Marcus Garvey was probably the most important Black leader in human history. I mean, his organization—
That's right.
—was millions and millions of people around the world in almost every country where Black people were.
That's right.
Caribbean and Africa and England and the United States. He was huge, and one of his important— I mean, people call it the Back to Africa movement, and that's not
absolutely.
Yeah,
but it's more than that.
Yes. Exactly. And one of the things he said about Africans abroad, right, with regard to relation to the ancestors and cousins on the continent, was that if Africa, the continent, was not free and independent and had dignity, there is no way that Africans outside of Africa could have that personal sense of dignity if there was the shame at home.
Absolutely. Yeah. And incidentally, in Kwame Nkrumah's autobiography, he says that the book that had the most influence on him was the philosophy, the opinions. Is it the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey? Yeah. So he acknowledged Garvey's impact on him.
Oh yeah,
the most. He said of all that he read, that was what really had a strong effect on him, and it must have to a large extent shaped his views. So we even have had immediately after independence a Black Star shipping line.
That's
we had a fleet of ships
and just
vessels.
That the Black Star Line was Marcus Garvey's shipping line from the 1920s, I believe it was.
Sure.
Right.
So that idea of self-reliance,
exactly.
African self-reliance, Africans abroad and those at home in the continent coming together to work together to develop, and to progress.
Right.
That is the idea of Pan-Africanism, that we need to find a way to work together to regain our dignity, our full dignity and better quality of life. Together. We can only achieve that if we work together. So you are absolutely right about Marcus Garvey and his influence. I think we all need to read him and study him.
Yeah, and I believe your father would have. I believe your father met Carlos Cook when he was in Harlem, when your father was living in the States, and Carlos Cook was kind of like the torchbearer after Garvey died in the United States, and after Garvey was deported from the States.
Right.
Carlos Cook carried the torch in the United States for a long time. Then later, I mean, Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam and Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan, they carry that torch in their own way because it was economic independence and so forth. Yeah, and so your father was an embodiment of that for the African continent, which was, the linchpin of it all, because Africans cannot be free in America or England or the West Indies fully without Africa itself being redeemed.
It's directly linked. Even the civil rights movement, it gained strength and inspiration from independence, from Ghana's independence and African countries gaining independence. If you listen to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, Birth of a Nation, I mean, Google it and listen to it. He was in Ghana on the eve of independence, and he was so inspired by the enthusiasm and the atmosphere, you know, so he went back and gave that sermon, Birth of a New Nation.
Yeah.
So even the conditions of Africans in the States, you know, that was to a large extent influenced by what is happening, was happening at the time.
Exactly.
In the mother continent.
Malcolm X constantly referred to it. Yeah.
So our futures, our destinies are together. The same way that today, Africa will find it very difficult to develop without the total involvement and participation in that development by Africans everywhere, not just in the States, but everywhere. You see, the continent has to unite, but also what the African Union is calling the sixth region, the diaspora codes, you know, the global African family. We need to come together to work out our speedy development.
Yeah, and this has been going on, which a lot of people don't realize. I mean, from the, you know, maybe as early as, I mean, definitely the 18th century. I mean, with Liberia and Sierra Leone and many, you know, Black Americans going to Africa. In Liberia was the American one, and Sierra Leone was the British one, and there are people who have made that journey back to try to develop, and for various reasons it hasn't yet been fulfilled, but it's an ongoing historical process. I don't know if I would. You may be familiar with Paul Gilroy. Do you know him? The London cultural theorist. He had a very interesting book called that he published in the 90s called I think it's called The Black Atlantic. That's what it's called. You're aware of that?
Yes.
A very brilliant idea and a phrase capturing the idea, which C.L.R. James talked about a long time ago in the 60s, that James was talking about the Caribbean being the birth of the modern world, in the sense that there was a place where people were imported, the raw materials were imported, the economy was purely import-export, that it was proto-industrialization before Europe even industrialized, and that everything in the Caribbean was imported, from our clothes to our food to everything, and everything was exported. It was the birth of the modern economy, the modern world here in the Caribbean, and that we were always a global people, always, and that this idea of the Black Atlantic is this movement, especially West Africa, Caribbean. The South American coast, because Brazil and Guyana, that's very important there, and then the plantation United States up to England, down Europe. So and there's been this interchange that's been unnoticed by dominant white society, that so that Black people and African peoples in this Black Atlantic, they're always moving and shifting between each other, and that there's almost like a different geography operating, there, that and that it's really a unified world in a lot of ways. You find these people like C.L.R. James, like George Padmore, like Kwame Nkrumah, who have been navigating this world constantly. There's a flow of goods, ideas, peoples, books, experiences. And so,
Absolutely.
and so to think of Ghanaian independence as being isolated or singular neglects this whole
absolutely
structure of centuries of
yes,
this global thing. Yeah. And would you like to
absolutely.
comment on that?
Yes. No, absolutely. And it's even influenced South-South cooperation, what we call South-South cooperation today. You see, and that is a component also of Pan-Africanism. You know, that we need to develop South-South cooperation. So indeed, you are right. The Caribbean has always had a strong role, and even today, even with the reparations movement,
that's right.
You know, they are far ahead. So yes, there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas, you know, that have always come from there. You are absolutely right.
I was in Nigeria in 1999, I believe it was, 98 or 99, during the transition to for the first election after Samia.
Civilian rule.
Constitutional. Right. So it was during the interim government there with Abu Bakr.
Okay.
And so that was fascinating. And there were a couple of things that struck me when I was there from a Caribbean perspective. One was on television in Nigeria. I could not believe how many Trinidadian music videos were being shown, more than in Trinidad. Right? So there were more calypso and soca videos being played in Nigeria than I was seeing in Trinidad, the home of where the music is created. Because in Trinidad, people keep saying, well, we need to have more local music and in our airwaves, and and in Africa it's normal. And then the other thing too, when I was on the coasts, but in Lagos, and my friend who invited me there, he was. I remember he was talking to somebody out on the street, and he told me I wouldn't understand what they were saying, but they were speaking this Creole, which was almost exactly like a West Indian dialect. You know, it was almost like a combination of Bajan.
Maybe what we call pidgin.
That's
pidgin
right.
English.
That's right. So pidgin, I mean, it's the father of. It must be the father of all our West Indian dialects from Barbados and Jamaica and Trinidad.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
It's amazing. And these deep connections that persist, you know, I just find
and
incredible.
That is why it's remarkable. And that is why we need to really intensify or focus on studying our civilizations, our history. You know, it is so important that we even rewrite our history. You know, in Ghana, before the illegal overthrow, there was a big project, Encyclopedia Africana, that Dubois was heading. He was put as the head of that when he came to live in Ghana. He died in Ghana in 1963.
That's
and
correct.
Today, in Accra, in the heart of the center of our capital city of Accra, there is the Dubois Center.
Right.
But anyway, so Dubois was heading this project, Encyclopedia Africana. And there is, I think now, some kind of encyclopedia that's being promoted. But the idea is this, that we need to study, really focusing on studying our history, our civilization, our own religions, our traditions, our culture. We need to truly understand them and study them, and let's encourage our young people, our curricula, to be infused with them, so that we understand where we came from.
Exactly.
You know, and how sophisticated our institutions and cultures were. It's not nostalgia, or it's not just glorying in the past, but it's a very important reminder of who we are. Because until we understand who we are, it will be difficult to know where we came from. it will be difficult to know where we are going. So it's part of this, not just the healing and regeneration and encouraging ourselves, but it's part of the cultural emancipation.
Absolutely.
And I believe that will give us the courage to tackle modern day issues from our own perspective, not to rush into copying blindly or accepting, solutions that might not exactly be the right thing for us. So, but you need courage, and you need conviction, and you need self-belief and confidence to be able to do that. So leaders like Kwame Nkrumah had that. They studied deeply. If you pick his main thesis calling for African unity, Africa must unite, he starts that book. It's about 21 chapters, but he starts from our old African civilizations. He takes you through all that, then the colonial times, the colonial imprint, the struggle for independence, rebuilding a nation like Ghana. And then he comes halfway through the book, he begins arguing for African unity. He ends by giving you examples of unity, examples of unions, political unions from across the world, the USA, USSR, Switzerland. I mean, he gives you confederations, federations, he gives you a wide range before he says, this is what our unity should be based on. And he gives you the main three objectives: economic integration and planning, common defense strategy, common foreign policy. But the point I started making is that it is so important for us to understand who we are as Africans, because we know what needs to be done, but what we are lacking is the courage and the self-confidence to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've realized we've spoken so much, and I think I have to have like a two-part with you, because there's so many topics to discuss. So I'm going to skip over some things I really wanted to discuss about your father and even about the coup and even some of the problems, right? Like the one-party democracy, the president for life, the U.S.-led
Sure.
the U.S.-led coup, which is what it was in '66, and very similar to Venezuela going on now. But if we skip over that, sadly, we'll have to deal with that another time. But when you came back to Ghana in 2008 to lead this, now you want to make your father's ideas alive, and so in a different context, did you find you have to change a lot of things? How did you do that in a modern context? I would like to
know. Because the essential message, let's say, is more or less the same, because is Africa united today? Mm-hmm. Are we united? No, we are not.
Yeah.
You see? So that has not been achieved. In fact, we are so far away from that, you know, so we really have a lot of work to do. Number two, the thrust of his domestic policies was on industrialization, making us self-sufficient, food security and industrialization, beginning with agro-businesses. Are we producing more, really producing more as countries? No, we are not.
Let me ask
you. His main, let's say, policies or proposals have not been achieved yet.
That's right.
You see, and we still acknowledge that we need to reach unity. We need to industrialize. He's gone.
So now, as a practicing politician, as a sitting MP, as someone who's going to be running for elections again and continue, so is it your platform to politically unite the different countries into a United States of Africa?
Yes, yes. And by the way,
platform.
I'm not currently a sitting MP. Yes,
right.
I would like to be by 2020.
But you were a
yes,
sitting.
of course. Yes, I was.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But going back to your question, yes, indeed, because I can see that individually we truly are struggling as countries, even with the best intentions. It's very, very difficult to get good deals separately. Right. I mean, our economies, our GDPs are in billions, but the GDPs of Japan, the US, China are in trillions.
That's right.
So we really, there's a limit to how much we can improve the quality of lives of our people separately. So I am convinced that unity is the only solution. For our survival, we must unite, you see? So even my practicing politics, my being an MP, my sitting in parliament, looking at our budget and our let's say, the challenging situation we are in to balance our books, if you will, has even convinced me more. It has strengthened my resolve. We must unite. It's a must. Yeah. It's not even we don't have another option. I don't see any other way out. But of course, that's not the only thing that we need to do, But that is what that is the quickest way, the most effective way to give us economic power as a people.
So what's your view on the role of China in Africa right now?
China is working for China's interests, as every other continent will. You see? China is in Africa. And every African country know that. Our infrastructure, I mean, we get the World Bank, the African Development Bank. There are some other, not the World Bank, I beg your pardon. The World Bank and some other institutions help us with our infrastructure. But we need to do so much infrastructure-wise, so much, so quickly, because we have a population that's growing quickly, that China's entry into the continent, helping us with all this infrastructure construction and building, is something we cannot escape. Yeah, you see.
I'll tell you.
But we as small nations, if we plan together, this is where we want to have this dam. This is where we want to have this bridge. This is where we want to have this industry. Look, Ivory Coast and Ghana, the cocoa production combined, and say bring Nigeria, we would dominate the production in the world. Absolutely. And no one can dictate the price of cocoa. Also, we will be able to produce, secondary industries from cocoa. Yeah. But currently, we are exporting in imported sacks, because we import the sacks in which we put. So you imagine, the more we produce, the more sacks we have to import. Yeah. And we don't control the price of this commodity.
That's right.
So if we get together, we won't be in that situation. So the onus is on African countries to plan together as to how we are going to industrialize. Instead of just thinking this is the threat or that is the threat. Everything is a threat to us if we remain balkanized. Everything will be a threat.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. In fact, I mean, I'm quite enthusiastic about China's Belt and Road Initiative, and yeah, I think it's from a global development stage, it is pushing human history onto the next level. And I do not believe it is an imperial project. I think that is propaganda from the West. And so I was interested on your idea from there. But certainly part of the difficulty comes if, as a partner, be it in Africa, be it in the Caribbean, be it in Latin America, be it elsewhere, if you don't come to the table with anything and just let China direct everything, that's the problem. That's not necessarily China's fault. That's your own kind of
your lack of strategy.
That's right.
Your lack of a strategy.
And it's your colonial mindset that someone else always has to do something for you. Right?
Thank you.
Exactly.
That is why the real revolution must happen here.
That's right.
And that revolution, as it happens, it will propel us towards unity.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. The true liberated African mind is a Pan-African mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is the future. You see, as we liberate ourselves fully, we will automatically gravitate towards the most logical solution to our problems.
Exactly.
Incidentally, Kwame Nkrumah, 1961, speaks at the UN for the first time wearing his kente cloth, our hand-woven, beautiful, yes, with all these patterns, with mathematically, designed patterns, and he calls for China to have a seat at the United Nations.
Yeah.
So you see, small Ghana at the time had the courage and the strength to argue for. So he saw China's rise far, far ahead. That's why we call such people visionaries.
That's right.
Because they can look into the future. But he was inspired by China because he said there's a developing country and they are doing so much, and there is a continent also, the same as India. He was very much inspired by India too, because he said those are continents almost, not countries.
Yeah.
And it is true. And he wanted Africa. He wanted to make a contribution for Africa to follow, in those lines, to also be a continent. Despite our diversity, we could work together, plan together as one nation.
Because the vision that's going on, like with the Trans-Aqua project, in terms of taking water from from East Lake Victoria, I believe it is, but on the east side, and taking it up to the Congo and then up to West Africa, it will make Africa habitable and fertile. It's massive engineering for human development, and once you, as Africans, we as Caribbean people, or whoever is involved, know what we want, then it's almost like we could end up using the Chinese rather than the Chinese using us. And there's no reason why that can't happen. In fact, it's a mutually beneficial situation. And
absolutely,
what people don't realize is that I believe it's been since the 2000s, if I'm not mistaken, but Africa has had the fastest growing economies in the world. In 2019, according to the IMF, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Benin, Kenya, Uganda, Burkina Faso will be in the top 10 fastest economies in the world. And this coincides with Chinese investment, because unlike the IMF and World Bank, there's no conditionalities, there's no austerity. Even the coup against your father in 1966, which was supported by the World Bank and IMF, that's all part of it. That's what's going on in Venezuela with Guaido and Maduro. They want to see political changes. They want to see austerity. They want to see you cutting social services and privatizing, They want to dictate your political policy, your social policy, as well as your economic policy.
Yeah, but we know best what is good for us. You know, we have our elders, we have our wise men and women, we have our intellectuals. We know what is good for us.
Yeah.
You see, we simply need the freedom to be able to do that, you know, pursue an independent path to our development.
Yeah.
That is what Africa needs to and has to do.
And as you say, that is so important. And this whole idea that people keep projecting Africa as a basket case, when for decades it's been having the fastest growing economies in the world. There's so much going on there that's positive and moving.
Sure.
You know, and
Sure.
that robs people of the inspiration to move forward. You need that. All human beings need that.
Sure. But the trouble is that, you see, sometimes there's development, but it's not inclusive.
That's right.
So
jobless
and this
grow.
is, yes, but this is so contrary even to our traditional humanist principles.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
of collectivism, communalism, humanism even.
Yes.
You see, and so it goes even against our true culture and nature.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not exactly working. It
that's
doesn't
true.
work in our societies because that's not,
That's right. Because the conquering of GDP growth rates has not been your.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
culturally.
Even absolutely. Even the winner takes all. Even the political. Even with practicing democracy, the winner takes all system doesn't really work for us.
Yeah.
Because we are used to African democracy. You talk and talk and talk until you reach some kind of consensus.
Yes.
You don't leave anyone behind, Mm-hmm. So even that has to be studied and researched and applied so that nobody is really left completely in the cold.
Yeah.
Even decision making wise, you see.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of homework to do.
Yeah, what you're really calling is for a radical rethink, and it's not just following the models that exist or liberal democracy or socialism.
Yes.
That it really has to be, finding your own way, your own solution.
And it would be scientific because
Yes.
it would be demonstrable. We can demonstrate it.
Yeah.
It has to be empirical. You see, it has to be something that works for you.
Yeah. And I think it's important what you're saying because in a sense, yes, we're all the same, we're all human, but not everybody has exactly the same goals, right? So it may not be that the ultimate goal for most Africans may be the most amount of material things you can produce and consume within a year, right? Whereas that might be a legitimate American expectation. But that might not be. Everybody may not want, maximum number of material goods and so forth. There might be other values, that exist there, and that the whole dominant liberal capitalist view overshadows in these other human aspirations and other views of human development. Would you agree?
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
You see, but because that's what we've been doing for the last few decades. We've been implementing dictates and advice, but has it really, really helped us? No. What have we got?
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of young people fleeing.
Absolutely.
You see, so what have we got? Acres and hectares of arable land that is not really cultivated.
Mm-hmm.
Importing so much rice importation in Ghana, in our small country in Ghana alone. It's incredible. We could save so much foreign currency if we focus more on producing rice locally, and it would be fresher.
Exactly.
So
More healthy.
so there is some adjustments has to be made.
Yeah, yeah.
And a serious one, and quickly. That's what you see now, that in our lifetime.
Yeah.
It can't be later. In our lifetime, every African has a purpose.
Absolutely.
It is not right that, yes, in our continent, you have, if you look at the child mortality rates, there are several things that give you an indication.
Yeah.
That no, this is not right.
Absolutely.
This cannot be the continent where, more young children die of diseases that could easily be treated.
Yeah.
There's something wrong. Where some people still don't have running water. No. And women carrying. No. There's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with all that.
So if to try to bring it to a conclusion, because I could keep you here for hours and hours and hours,
Yeah.
but so, if you had to boil your message down to one main message that you want to send to the world, what is that message?
I mean, I can't find a better one than Africa must unite.
Yeah. Sure.
I really can't find. I've tried.
Yeah.
I've tried. But this is something that we are yet to accomplish.
Right.
Let us do it in our lifetime. Let us do it in our lifetime. We cannot wait. We've waited too long.
Yeah.
For the past 400 years, Africans have not been united. And we've had one setback after another. It is enough. It is enough. We must unite to rewrite our history.
Yeah. Now, if you had to do this over, your struggle to your time abroad, your time coming back, an MP and going forward, would you change anything?
I don't know. I mean, yes, I wish it were easier. But yes, of course, I wish things were easier, things were smoother. But something, the struggle is beautiful. Because, yes, I believe it is.
Yes.
Because, because you learn so much, and the greater the challenge, the bigger the love, definitely. I speak from experience.
Very good, very good. And let me also ask you, in your goal, your projects, politically, economically, etc., would you say that there are enemies, really, people who are really opposed to what you're doing?
Always.
Yeah.
You will always have people opposed to you. You will have what you call, yes, in quotes, enemies. Yeah. That will always happen. You cannot please everybody. You will make some people very angry, but you have to become wise.
Mm-hmm.
We have to become wise in this struggle as we go ahead, because yes, sometimes there's a time to confront, there's a time to retreat, there's a time to be diplomatic, there's a time to be firm and and outspoken. You just have to be wise. Let us do this wisely.
Yeah. Because I mean, if I were to even go back, I mean, when was it you lost your seat? Was it 2015?
No, 2012. Actually, 2012. Yes, I was. I mean, when I was an MP till 2012. Yes. Right.
And I mean, was that a big blow to you at the time?
It wasn't, but it definitely weakened us. It weakened me politically, weakened the struggle, because I was the only member of parliament for the party I belonged to at the time. I was also the chairperson and leader of that party. So it was a blow in that sense.
And that party was your father's party, right? The convention.
Well, it's a party that took the name of his party.
Okay, so not the actual party.
I would hesitate to call it the actual party for many, many reasons.
Okay.
Yes, for many reasons, but that would take some time to explain.
Yeah.
But suffice it to say that, you see, yes, smaller parties also have their own challenges. And, you know, and bigger parties sometimes dominate smaller parties indirectly behind the scenes. So those of us, of course you do.
I ran for elections on the small party and lost as well.
Yes, sometimes, yes, but it's even sometimes without you knowing, your party could be in bed with one of the bigger parties, and you are just trying and giving out your all. And so, you know, so we have to be smart, you know, and learn from our experience. The important thing is what we must never lose touch with the people, and the political journey must continue.
Yeah.
So you always have to find a platform to speak with the people.
Right.
Always.
And let me ask you, for young people listening to our podcast, our conversation, what would you recommend to them? What would be your recommendation? Number one.
Number one, know where you came from. It is imperative. I didn't find the courage or strength to get involved until I understood a little of our history and civilization. You know, that gave me the courage.
Yeah.
You see? And the number two, that Pan-African spirit. No one can give it to you. You must go and find it.
Yeah.
You must find it. Number three, get involved. Nothing is given to us for free. We have to get it.
Yeah.
Decision making or power, we have to get it. So yes, that's it. We just have to. It's a purpose. And you know what? When you get these things, you will see that the struggle is indeed beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing. It's not an ego trip. It's
That's
not.
Right.
It's, you know, this is for us. You know, as an African, you need to understand where you are at this point in time and what must be done.
Absolutely.
And you will enjoy it in the process.
Absolutely. So over the next 5 years, let's say, I know you have some things planned.
Oh, many things to do. Yes. I will
tell us about some of them.
Back into Parliament, but also the Kwame Nkrumah Pan-African Center, which I set up. We need to get on with many things. The books, I would love to reintroduce young people to Africa Must Unite. Kwame Nkrumah's books. I speak of freedom. Some of his powerful books, because they are empowering. They are seriously empowering. So I want to do that to Africans everywhere. In all forms, you know, forms that would be attractive to younger people, digital, audio, you name it.
Right.
Then, yes, so that definitely I want to do. And we need to also, and I want us to move forward on this African unity thing. It has to be, the ground must shake with it, you know. Popular determination. It has, I mean, we can see there is something called, you know, people's power.
Yeah.
You know, look, I mean, here, being in Northern Africa now and hearing about Sudan, Algeria and all that, you can see that, yes, when the ground decides, things happen.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we can decide for unity too. We can push our leaders to go for unity.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much, not only for this interview, but for everything you have done and are doing. I mean, keeping your father's legacy alive is incredibly important. And working for the development of Ghana, of Africa, and of Africans worldwide, it's an historic mission, and I support it fully. I admire your vision, your bravery, your determination, and I wish you every success in going forward.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
It's been a real pleasure. And I think I really do want to have you on at a later point to discuss some more things.
It's a promise.
Great.
Thank you.
Right, so
Sorry
that's it. That's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now. And please, Samia, get a glass of water.